All right. Good morning. Thank you, Kiki, for being here. It's good to be in Portland. Thank you so much for making time.
My pleasure, Sanjeev. Thank you for having me.
Okay. No. So the story goes, Kiki, I've been following you for a little while now, and I think like a lot of the Instagram followers know you, who follow the Momo, obviously, right? Momo or Mama, however you pronounce that. So I could just have your introduction, but I think it makes more sense for you to just kind of introduce yourself, like your name and what you do. Let's go for it.
Sounds good. My name is Kiki. I am a Tibetan, and I founded a Tibetan food brand here in the Oregon called Himalayan Dumplings by Kiki. So I mainly specialize in frozen, ready-to-cook momo and Tibetan hand pies. And so the aspiration is to highlight a Tibetan culinary heritage, but also make dumplings that are food allergen friendly and inclusive with vegan friendly options and all.
Okay. And Kiki, I like I was mentioning just before, people know about you, and a lot of my friends are huge fans. They still have not made it to your place yet, but they've actually told me about you, and no, they'll eventually make it out there. So one thing that you talked about, and I think like I watched one of your videos where you kind of go into what really inspired you to kind of start this. And originally you are from Tibet or Tibet. First of all, how do you pronounce that?
It depends. So the Tibet is fine.
Right.
If you are from South Asia, Tibet.
Tibet, right.
That's okay as well.
Right.
So either works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and obviously, as a Nepali, we grew up saying Tibet, and obviously when you come to the US, Tibet, like the American pronunciation, kind of comes into play. So I know that there's a very close relationship between Nepal and Tibet, right? So we have we share borders, and I know that there's a lot of mixture of culture. Like you have like a lot of Tibetans that would have migrated over to Nepal all those years ago, and similar, like there's a lot of business trade that happened between the territories. And I think that's where the Momo kind of came around, right? The stories that the business...
Sort of, yeah. So they were the Newar traders that have been trading for centuries and going to Tibet. Yeah. And that's how the Newaris in particular were exposed to Tibetan food, namely momo is what they seem to be really drawn towards. And then we have Tibetan refugees like me who, after Tibet was invaded, fled Tibet to the neighboring countries of Nepal and India in particular. So you will see fairly large Tibetan presence and influence in both Nepal and India. And then there was the earlier groups of Tibetan, for example, like Sherpas, that immigrated to Nepal, for example. Sherpa, for those of you that don't know, actually means people from the east in Tibetan language because they migrated from the east to the borders of Tibet and Nepal.
That's interesting. They're very interesting. So I know that there's a huge population of Tibetans out in Queens, New York. I think that is probably the biggest.
Probably the hub of.
Yeah, so that is the hub of the Tibetans. And again, I was fortunate enough to live in New York for almost like 5 years. And I used to make trips out there and to Queens, Jackson Heights, and the best food ever, right? So one question for you is, how'd you end up in Portland? How'd you end up in this state?
Yeah, primarily because the people that sponsored me lived in Oregon, and they were the only people in the U.S. that I knew of. So that's why I landed in Oregon.
Okay,
yeah.
And you've been here how many years?
Over a little over a couple of decades.
Couple of decades.
Yeah.
And generally, what you can tell from that is if you stay at a place for over like a couple of decades, most likely you like the place, right?
Yes, I do. I do love the 4 seasons that we have in Oregon, how green it is and so on. But also out of habit, I'm a creature of habit. Okay. So this is where I came to, and this is what I became familiar with. And this is what I call my third home now, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Tibet, right?
That's a really good question you asked. I've actually never been to Tibet.
Oh, tell us your story then. Okay, so 'cause I thought, okay, so can you tell us
And
like
it's
how's your
a very common question I get
okay.
because people assume that I was born in Tibet and I've been to Tibet. So like most Tibetan refugees, especially in my generation in particular, we grew up as refugee status in Nepal and India. So my parents and my grandparents fled Tibet decades ago when Tibet was invaded by China. So, you hear this stereotype in the term of fresh off the boat for Asian refugees and stuff like that. For Tibetans, it was walking across foot by night across the mountains in the most frigid of weathers that took months, and many people lost their lives due to the weather. And that's how my parents ended up in Nepal and India, and which is where I grew up. So I have never been to Tibet. And as a US citizen, another thing that most people don't know is for Tibetans like me, even that hold US citizenship, we will likely never be able to set foot in Tibet, even as US citizens, because statistically, most of our visas by the Chinese embassy is rejected.
Yeah. And I know US has a very complex geopolitical situation going on with with Tibet, and for people who don't know too much about Tibet, one of the things, personally, to be honest with you, before talking to you, I despite being from Nepal, I never really looked so much deep into the history of Tibet and what it actually the area that it covers, and it's a huge area. You're talking about, I don't even know,
10th largest in terms of land mass, 10th correct. Largest country in the world.
It is,
I
right?
Believe,
it is huge, and it just obviously and I think they also mention the elevation, the average elevation is probably the highest ever in the world, right?
And that's why the term the roof of the world.
The roof of the world, correct. Okay. So how long have you, so you grew up, so obviously your grandparents, they moved away because of the conflict. So where did you grow up? Where was your childhood?
I grew up between Nepal and India. So when I say between, I mean in both countries. So I went back and forth.
Okay.
Yeah. And I went to school in India, boarding school in India in Darjeeling, okay. And Delhi. Okay. And then I grew up in my winter vacation, which was the longer vacations in South Asia.
Okay.
About 2-3 months. That's where I lived in Kathmandu.
Kathmandu, okay. Well, shout out to people from Darjeeling. I was actually there a couple of years back. Amazing place.
It's a magical little place.
I loved it. I have good memories of that place. And so, Kiki, a lot of our school teachers, and I give a lot of credit to whatever success that I've had in my life as an engineer. There's a couple of teachers that are behind that, and they're originally from Darjeeling. And again, I was fortunate enough to just travel out there, just kind of see how it exactly is. Try the Darjeeling momos, or you call it that. So we wanted to. I wanted to talk about this, and this term refugee, especially here in the U.S. In some ways, because of the political background, or because of the situation that we are currently in, it almost has, unfortunately, a negative connotation to it, which I don't think it's fair. Because usually what happens is around the world, you have conflicts, right? And people generally want to live in peace. And when your nation is not at peace, you look for alternatives, right? And that's where refugees are just simply born because, or they come about because of a compulsion. They don't have any other option.
It's not by choice.
It's not by choice, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, when I started or made the decision to start my small business journey, one of the advice that I came across a lot is stay away from politics on your page. It's a lose-lose situation. You don't want to. And it was one of those moments as a small business owner and also as a refugee and immigrant, makes you really question where you stand with your values. And for me, it was a non-negotiable. It's part of who I am. It's part of, if I were to keep politics completely out of the conversation on my social media, you would not be getting an authentic reflection of who I am. You'll be getting a very curated, inaccurate depiction of who I am. So I chose to share politics, as people would say. Because for refugees like me, we don't have the privilege. It really is a privilege. We don't have the privilege to decouple and select. This is part of what I will want to represent or sell or market, and this part I don't want to. It's who we are. It's shaped the very life journey and identity of who I am as a Tibetan refugee. So it would be almost unfair to our customers to only tell half the story.
Yeah. And your business, I think you call it, can you remind me again?
The name of the business.
The name of the business.
It's a mouthful. It's Himalayan dumplings by Kiki.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a tagline that you have on there, I think from Tibet to Oregon or something along the lines of that, right?
I use a couple, which I probably, from marketing standpoint, I should probably narrow it down to one. But I say rooted in Tibet, made in Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah, because articulating my culinary heritage is one of the very aspirations of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So even in terms of product packaging and marketing and stuff like that, those things are very important for me to point out because it's not just about selling food or consumption of food. It is equally important for me to tell a story behind the food that brings you the food.
Yeah. So where was your inspiration for starting this business? Because there's obviously there's a lot of factors that goes into it. But what was the turning point for you? Where you thought, you know what, this is it. I'm going to do this.
Yeah. There was actually a pivotal moment that I don't share very much about publicly. I was doing seasonal pop-ups every summer for 6 or 7 years as a passion project because there was no Tibetan food representation, so I wanted to do it. It was just that, And I've always known over the years, and I've observed and seen that momo business, so the momo industry, is becoming a booming one, particularly in India and Nepal, and it's kind of growing in the US. But what really was my turning point is one day during the pandemic when I came across a financial news article that listed the top 10 multi-million-dollar momo brands, and there wasn't a single Tibetan on it. That really struck me hard as a Tibetan because momo is one of the hallmark dishes, cornerstone of our Tibetan culinary heritage and cultural identity that spans across my grandparents who would have been in over 100 years old if they were alive, my parents who are in their 70s, me, I'm close to 50s now, and then my daughters who are in their teens, so 4 generations and not a single Tibetan on that list. That's what really moved me. I felt a sense of responsibility and a calling to make space at that table to say, you know what, let me also claim space as a Tibetan and tell the Tibetan story through the lens of a Tibetan.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does Tibetan food differ from the other foods, even in Asia, or what would be the separation for the Tibetan food? What do you say towards that?
In general, I find it always hard to describe Tibetan food. It's very simple, no fuss. Things that are staple, for example, are like samba, roasted Tibetan barley. That is, by the way, actually considered one of the superfoods in today's world now. But yeah, samba, tukpa, some kind of Tibetan noodle soup, momo, which was a special occasion food, by the way, because meat was not as accessible, more expensive, and things like that. So very simple, stays close to the origin or the source of the food. Not a lot of fuss. It has evolved some, just as is natural with any kinds of food. It evolves, right? As per the journey of the people. So, like for me, for example, when my grandparents came here, my parents were little, we settled in India and Nepal. And then so there was a cross influence between both cultures. So we now had access to vegetables and spices that we otherwise didn't have easy access to back in Tibet. So there is some evolution that happens even with, for example, momo. I remember when I was little growing up in Kathmandu, that Momo was found in, this is like many decades ago, so I'm old, I'm aging myself. But I remember Momo was found only in a couple of, mom and pop kind of hole in the wall Tibetan shops. And back then, many people didn't know about Momo. And then I went back, I visited Nepal. I think the first time I went back was like about a decade ago. And Momo was everywhere. And it was pretty incredible because for me as a Tibetan, it felt like almost parallel to the evolution of our journey as a refugee, where we came to a new country. The language was different. The climate was incredibly different. The cultural, the way of life was different. And we had to evolve, to adjust, to sustain, to perhaps thrive. And Momo, the evolution of Momo is also very similar. Nobody knew about it. And then decades fast forward, here we are. Momo is beloved in the Himalayan community. And to me, that's a wonderful thing.
It's very well received. And let me tell you, like my story, my familiarity with Momo. So I grew up a vegetarian, right? Until my older brother, and he's a big fanatic of the momos, and I must have been, probably in the first grade, probably 4, 5, 6, whatever age I was at. And then he literally asked me to just try it out. And meat was not really my thing. I tried it out initially. Like I never really got into it initially. And afterwards it was just, and after that,
no going back.
Oh my goodness. And now my friends they probably know me as like they call me like this professional momo eater, like in a very sarcastic way, because that's my favorite food. But going back to some of the food that you mentioned, Kiki, it's actually very interesting because I never really thought about this before. So Nepal, although it's a fairly small country, but we have a lot of, it's sort of, if you ask anyone from Nepal, they'll tell you it's sandwiched between India and China. But also it's in that place where you have a mixture of like a lot of group of people. And what that really gives you is this blend of different cultures and different food. For example, you mentioned thukpa, which is, I never really thought about that as a Tibetan food, to be honest with you, until you mentioned that. And I'm like,
And that's a very common perception, by the way.
And there could be like maybe a lot more foods, and I'm pretty sure there are, but it just goes to show, like what the best part about people migrating and moving and traveling and getting themselves familiar with the food, right? It just goes to show what's out there. And again, whoever brought Momo to Nepal, thank you so much. I am very, very happy for your efforts. So Kiki, can you go back? I know you mentioned you grew up going back in between Delhi and Darjeeling, right? How was your childhood? Like, give us like an insight into how's childhood out in Darjeeling and wherever you were.
I'd imagine it was similar to a lot of people's. Nothing that really stands out. I went to boarding school like a lot of people did, at least during those times. I went to a school called Mount Hermon in Darjeeling. I was there all the way from kindergarten to the 12th grade. So my classmates literally become friends for life that I'm still in contact with decades later. Our school was filled with Indians, Nepalis, Tibetans. So it was our own little world.
Okay.
We were kind of encapsulated in that because, we had rules about not stepping out and things like that.
Right.
And then so I had exposure. The school was a Christian one. So even though I'm a Buddhist, I grew up a Buddhist, I was exposed to a different religion. And when you're a Tibetan refugee, survival, acceptance of differences, things like that comes kind of as a necessity to survive, to learn different languages and stuff like that. So a lot of people get surprised that many Tibetans can speak 4 languages. It's really a survival skill. You don't even think about it. You just have to, learn how to speak Nepali in order to survive in Nepal, learn how to speak Hindi if you want to survive in India, and then English, being mainstream language. And then you have a Tibetan language. So nothing special other than the fact that I went to a Christian boarding school. school, got exposed to different cultures and communities and countries. And you kind of take the best of that and apply it towards your life as an adult as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you had it seems like you're smiling as you're talking about your memories of that part of your life. And I'm assuming that you enjoyed that part of your life, right?
It's very fond memories. In a way, it's a very kind of almost like you're living in a bubble
Sure.
from the real world. Because when you're in a boarding school, for perspective to those who live outside South Asia, for example, because I think the perception of boarding school here in the US, for example, is very different than what we call boarding school. Here, it's wow, you have to be extremely wealthy to go to private boarding school and whatnot. There, of course, it is expensive, but not as elitist as it is over here. There, where we grew up, boarding school literally meant you had no contact with your family for 9 months out of a year.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then you do that all 3 formative years of kindergarten age all the way up until your high school age.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, I regard that as a very foreign time of my life.
Okay. And then, see, one of the things, Kiki, you've been here, more than a couple of decades, you mentioned. I've been here almost 2 decades now. And what that really gives us, I think, the advantage over the other people is we've seen extremities of, and again, in your case, you've actually seen a little bit more because you would have heard of the stories of your parents and your grandparents, right? So it kind of gives you this perspective about, when you're in the US, I personally feel like we take, even like as someone who's lived here for almost like 2 decades now, we do take a few things for granted in some sense, which I think you can kind of go into the comfort zone, right? But your thoughts on the two differences of the worlds between what you have out in South Asia and what you hear, like what's your take on that?
Yeah, I guess the silver lining to growing up as a displaced person, a refugee, you definitely experience hardships and challenges, many that are systemic and unseen by, say, a person living in India or Nepal. We go through our own extra set of challenges, navigating governments and just the regular way of living that most people native to the country won't see. It kind of teaches you to be resourceful and resilience. And the silver lining, I guess, if there is anything, a silver lining to a tragedy, is that, it gives you an opportunity to really sharpen your resilience. And those are life skills that are hard to learn in an academic setting. And I believe that has served me well as an adult as a young adult immigrating to the US and then living here, where there are a lot more opportunities and hardships like that one can only imagine and have never experienced. And I think perspectives are often rooted in personal experience. So I can understand why for the average American, it's easy to take for granted because one has never lived through such experiences. So I give it that. You take my kids, for example, they half Tibetan, half Cambodian, born in the US. Certain things, even like leaving the electricity on, running the hot water for too long for showers. Those are things that I still remember. Water shortages, electricity blackouts or load shedding, things like that. I still tell my kids, turn the light off. Even though I can afford to pay for it now, those are things I still want to conserve. Yeah.
There's a lot of differences here, right? And one thing I actually wanted to tell you. So there's a movie I watched. This is a couple of years back on a flight. There's a movie called Limbo. Okay, it's titled Limbo. It's about refugees, and I enjoyed that movie so much because it kind of gave people perspective about when you're a refugee, you're in a limbo, right? You can't really go back because there's issues there, and also the new place you're sort of trying to adapt, and people may not like you, or people are not really familiar with your culture, and it's just a unique place, unfortunately, for you to be at, which, you're just basically in a limbo, right? So for anyone who's listening to this, again, Kiki, I would definitely, if you haven't checked this movie out, I definitely would watch it. It's a bunch of people. It has like a little bit of sarcastic comedy tone to the movie as well, so it's very enjoyable. I really enjoyed that movie, but also the underlying topic there was really how difficult it is for people to sort of initially adjust, right? Because you're not familiar with the place. So let's move on to your business. So obviously you kind of gave us like insight on how you started it, and by the looks of it, I think again I want to congratulate you. It looks like it's a great success, and I hope you reach even higher successes than what you have achieved so far. So I also obviously you're an entrepreneur. You're running your own business, right? What was the hardest part of starting your business, and how were you able to overcome it?
Hardest part about starting my own business, perhaps one of them would be I was the breadwinner of the family. I had a well over 6-figure paying corporate job, very stable, lots of perks. And so I have a family to support. And so knowing what I know about entrepreneurship, even though I haven't never been one, doing the research, I knew that the risks were very high. The failure rate, in particular in the restaurant industry in the US and the food industry, is extremely high. The odds are really stacked against you just because of the way the system is. And I'm a very risk-averse person, just for context, by nature. So everything was like out of character for me to do it, but especially knowing that I had a family to support and that a decision I make to pursue a small business that will take time before it can even break even and make a profit and support me, it would take time, and not knowing how long that would take, the uncertainty, that was the very hard part, because I knew that whatever decision I make, whether I'm successful or I fail miserably at it, will affect or immediately impact my children and my family.
Okay, but you took the leap of faith, and
I sure did.
And I think you're doing terrific. And obviously so now you were working this corporate job, and a lot of us are in that boat, right? And then when you switch over, and now you're running a business that obviously you have to manage everything. So you did talk about like the hardest part was that, and currently as you see things. What are your challenges currently as far as running your business, and can you give us a little insight into that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the list is a very long one, but if I had to pick one, it would be undercapitalization. I think one of the reasons why many restaurants in particular fail more so than other industries, for example, is because there isn't enough cushion or capital or cash flow in order to sustain that food business for the amount of time it actually needs. For example, like a baby. When the baby is born, especially in the infancy stage, it needs a lot of resources in order to ensure that that baby grows into a healthy toddler. And in the restaurant business, for example, if you liken it to that, it requires a lot of cash and financial resources to sustain that. And a lot of times, small businesses are working on a bootstrapped budget like I am, and you kind of run out of that before the baby or the restaurant is healthy enough to stand on its own feet. Sure. And undercapitalization really is a limiting factor in how I make my decisions, how I scale, or how I've chosen to scale. So it's a huge bottleneck, but I have learned to kind of work around it on my own terms. So I have chosen a longer route of going the farmers market route, for example. In my first year of small business, for example, I didn't own a brick and mortar. I was literally renting a workstation by the hour out of commissary kitchen. I did what I had to do. Not ideal, but I did. And during the first year, I also worked my full-time job. So I was literally working 70 to 80 hours a week as a parent, and that was a lot. But I knew that sacrifices had to be made if I wanted to give my small business dream a fighting chance. So that first year, I saved every penny I could possibly save, and I lived so frugally, and then reinvested everything back. So that the second year is when I built out my production kitchen / my restaurant.
Okay, and for people who don't follow you on Instagram. So what's your Instagram handle again, Kiki? Can you tell everyone?
Yeah, Himalayan dumplings with the S at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me tell the world or whoever's listening to this right now. I followed you for a little while now, and the amount of effort that you and your posts are fabulous. Okay, it's very inspiring. The amount of work and you as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you are running. You're not really living up to like the folks, right? You are really getting down to it. You're doing everything possible from your end, and the effort, you can see that. And you as you mentioned, you started from what was it, like just a counter space basically, right, at a kitchen,
a commissary kitchen that I ran,
right?
yeah.
And then from there to having your own restaurant again, it's a fabulous story, so from your perspective, and how many years has it been, Kiki, since
going on to my third year now.
Okay. So as someone that has gone, and trust me, there are a lot of people that are out there that are listening right now that have this dream of, like just leaving their corporate job that they're maybe not happy with, or maybe they're okay with, but they don't really get that full satisfaction, right? So what would be your bullet points for them, or for them to kind of follow, so that, that they can probably pursue their path of happiness?
Yeah. I guess being clear on your why. And I know it sounds so simple, but really being clear on your why it is that you want to do what you want to do, or to change or transition into something different what you want to do, is really what's going to help you to anchor yourself when it comes time to pursuing the new thing that you want to do. Because there will be many moments of doubt, of challenges. You'll be working harder than all of your peers whom you'll see on social media enjoying life. You will feel major FOMO once in a while. You will get distracted by the shiny objects that are trending. You will, want to keep up with it. And all those things in reality happens even to the strongest will of us, And so it's during those times when you're too tired to wake out of the bed, when you've had so many setbacks and you feel discouraged getting out of bed the next morning, that if you remember your why, a greater purpose than just making more money is truly what will keep you going. It's having that purpose and really being clear on it, so that way you can stay focused on what you want to do next. So if you have that fire burning in you that scares you but still excites you, and you can't shut it out of your mind, you might have something there that is really calling you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a start, Kiki. I think it's really the start, because once I think you get your start, then you start to realize, okay, you may have to adjust here and there, but you're learning as you're growing this thing, right? And again, this is a similar journey to yours in some sense. This is something that I started just back in November of last year. And again, you start to like find out like little things here and there that you could adjust, and you can do well, and you can improve always.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Waiting for the perfect way or roadmap. Perfectionism, or the pursuit of perfectionism, will be our biggest, or was my biggest analysis paralysis. It left me so paralyzed because I started going so into the deep hole that I was becoming my biggest roadblock. So if you're looking for perfection, don't, because it will never happen. Perfection is always so fleeting, So if you 80% know what you want, the rest you will just figure out on the go. And that's how life is, right? We learn on the go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I want to circle back to the topic that we talked about earlier, Kiki, right? One of the the misconceptions that we talked about, being refugees. So I know you come from Tibet originally, and I come from Nepal, but we can be seen as someone who's not from that country originally, like someone more generic, right? And a lot of the times, I think there's a lot of the people that I've met here, like almost been here like 20 years now. And I don't think there's really any ill intention behind assuming that, for example, I get a lot of things people think that I'm from India, which there's nothing wrong with that. But one thing and I used to be that too, by the way. Like when I came here, like our cultures, if you look at it, Kiki, we're a little bit more direct. There's nothing, there's really no bad feelings when you really ask someone a question on where they're originally from. But now you have to kind of tread lightly. You have to be a little careful. So as far as, talking about like Tibet, right? And what are things that you want the world to know about Tibet that people don't really know too much about?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I appreciate you asking me that. I want the world to know that Tibet is not free, because it's not. It remains occupied for over 70 years. Today, Tibet is ranked the worst country in the world for basic human rights, worse than even Syria, Sudan, and North Korea, to give you perspective. The Tibet that you see on world maps today that is shown to you is less than half of what Tibet actually is or was. So yeah, there is, carrying a picture of the Dalai Lama, a spiritual leader, or owning a Tibetan national flag can result in years of imprisonment. That's how much control there is for Tibetans in Tibet who aren't allowed to move freely can't leave Tibet easily. Even Tibetans living in occupied Tibet have to get special permits to visit Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, when Chinese don't have to.
Right.
Today, there are more Chinese living in Tibet than there are actual Tibetans. And that is by no accident. It's by design to continue the systemic, strategic approach of erasing and rewriting Tibetan cultural identity, which is why what I'm doing today is more than just business. It's my way of cultural stewardship as a Tibetan. It's my way of keeping our Tibetan story alive. So yeah, it's so much more than just selling food or momo.
Understood. So as a common man like myself or people who are listening to this, what can we do to get the message out there? Is there anything that we can do on our part that we could do, to help the Tibetans?
Yeah. Staying aware, you showed curiosity that not a lot of people do anymore. And partly it's by design. It's by design that you, as a Nepal, even living with Tibetans, didn't know a lot about Tibetan history. It wasn't by accident. This is something I see even from our regular DC customers who come to my restaurant. Most of them are shocked to find out what's really going in Tibet, even though India hosts one of the largest Tibetan refugee communities in the world. So it's by no accident that people know very little about what's actually going on in Tibet, because the Chinese government implements a strategy out of sight, out of mind. It's an attention economy. So if I keep Tibet out of anyone's radar on social media, whatever, if I control communication so hard, people will forget about it. So being curious and being aware, that itself is a great start, because once you start to learn about our story, there is no way you're not going to feel passionate about trying to protect it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. And for anyone that's listening to this, take your 5 minutes out of the day when you're scrolling on your phone. Look up Tibet. Look at what's happening out there, and also just be curious about the history of Tibet, because again, we hear about Tibet or Tibet, and even from Nepal, coming from Nepal, being as close as someone can be to Tibet. To be honest with you, I know more about Tibet probably in the past 7 days after I started, kind of talking to you, and then we started to kind of arrange this podcast. But for listeners, please spend some time, be aware of Tibet, and I'm sure, like Kiki, when you're running your business, and people would come up to you and they'll probably assume that you're from another part of the world, right? I'm sure that probably has happened to you. Can you shed some light on that? If that has happened to you.
Yeah. Well, most times people can't tell what type of Asian I am. And I'm like, are you Korean? Yeah, so I get that quite a lot. Are you Korean? And then sometimes it's funny because I'm standing under my yellow farmer's market booth that says Himalayan dumplings by Kiki, and I still get asked that. So you can kind of see just how little, really little people, the average person knows about Tibet. But I don't mind it at all. I don't get offended. For me, I see it as an opportunity to share with one more person about it. So, yeah.
I think the intention matters, right? Because people, if you just don't know, like you were alluding to earlier, if you just don't know, you don't know, right? And it's an opportunity for us to kind of tell them, because trust me, a lot of people, the amount of time people have called me Sanjay instead of Sanjeev.
Oh, really?
Oh, don't worry about it. It happens all the time. And I'll tell you like a funny story. You speak Hindi a little bit? Okay. Or you speak fluently, I'm assuming.
No, so much.
So I also, I'm not like the most fluent, but I'll tell you like a funny story, Kiki. So I was at Los Angeles airport. This is, I don't know, like, it's pretty funny. 3, 4, I don't know. I don't even know like how many years ago. So I was waiting for my shuttle to take me to the parking lot. I'm at LAX airport. And I'm waiting, and then 2 lanes over, right? This is probably like not even in my lane. There's a shuttle that was supposed to pick me up. But 2 lanes over, you had this guy who was driving a shuttle, right? And then he's waving at me, and he says, see, he's not even stopping like in my lane. That'd be a different story. He's not stopping. He looks at me and he just kind of waves at me like this, and he says, "Kidhar jana hai bhai?" So I'm like, I thought that was so funny, but again, it just goes to show, like, there's no ill intention behind this. This is our innate thought that we have in our head that you see someone, and especially if you don't know about the cultures, things like that. And like I think you touched on a great point. You're telling them that, hey, this is an opportunity for them to learn about it, and we should absolutely embrace that. Yeah,
and one thing I do want to add, that every now and then I do get a Chinese person, for example, whether in person at the restaurant or at the farmer's market, where they'll find out that I'm a Tibetan, and I think this is, I don't presume ill intentions. I believe it is maybe they're naive or completely innocent, but yeah, they will say, oh, from Xizang, which you probably won't know and a lot of the world doesn't know, is the Chinese word for Tibet, that China is trying to get other governments to start using instead of the word Tibet. So, and then I will politely say Tibet, and they say Xizang. I'm like, no, Tibet.
Oh, so they're not allowed to say out of the word Tibet at all.
Yeah, so without getting too deep into politics, and with the way Chinese communications and public TV channels and however that works, there's a certain messaging that happens over and over and over again, to the point where the community has absorbed that information and what Tibet is and how Tibetans are, and that Tibet is always a part of China, is a narrative that a lot of Chinese grew up hearing over and over again, and many believe it. And so anyway, yeah, I will. Yeah,
that's like asking fish what is water, right? Because they're surrounded with that messaging for all those years.
So I will usually explain, and they will say, you speak Chinese, right? And I'll be like, no, I don't. I would love to, though. I don't. I speak Tibetan, though. And they were like, oh, it's not the same. I was like, no, it's completely different language. And then they'll say, where did you grow up? So I'll explain where I grew up and that I'm a refugee. And sometimes I can tell non-verbally there's some discomfort. It's not a very comfortable subject to talk about. I totally get it. But yeah, I mean, I look at that as an opportunity to perhaps spark a thought, a conversation that perhaps not everything they've heard is accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I think you mentioned a great point earlier. It's an opportunity to learn also, right? Even if you change someone's, like, or if someone has a change of thought, or maybe they just go back home and take a look at what exactly is Tibet, like go into like the history, right? I think that's what the point is. They know about that. So going back to, obviously you were here in Portland, in Oregon, which is a little far away from Tibet. how has it been, to maintain your Tibetan identity? And I know, your kids, they're half Cambodian and half Tibetan, and I'm assuming it's probably not, the community is not obviously as big as Queens, New York.
Right.
So how do you keep up with your traditions and your identity here in Oregon?
Yeah, I would actually say, in some ways, there are practical challenges. You are now living in the United States, where you are even smaller minority than you were in Nepal and India. You've always been a minority, but even smaller one now. Physically, you are also, unlike in Nepal or in India, there are dense Tibetan neighborhoods. So even though you are not in Tibet, you can still feel the Tibetanness everywhere around you. You can hear the Tibetan language being spoken on the street and stuff like that. Here, you'll never hear that. It'll probably be weeks before I even see it, to run into a Tibetan. So in that ways, in the practical sense, the way it's challenging, you are twice removed from everything that represents Tibetan. But then I have to also add that after I immigrated to the US, and maybe it has to do with age and me getting older and wiser, I felt a deeper connection and an appreciation, because even though I'm so physically removed now and distant, I feel that Tibet is something that I can always carry in my heart and in how I represent my small business and how I show up. So everything from my packaging to how I have decorated my little restaurant space. Everything is with the intention of staying connected to my Tibetan culture and my Tibetan roots. So yes, very, very far away from it, but it's in me every single day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen your posts celebrating like the New Year's
Mm-hmm.
and the other other. So what are the other cultural things that you normally do, like your tradition, right? Like what are the typical ones that?
Usually it's around Losar,
Losar, yeah.
which is Tibetan New Year, which just passed. So that's probably the primary one. I mean, there are other religious ceremonies. I am not particularly religious in that way. Also, from a practical sense, it's challenging to do that because there isn't really a monastery around where I live, versus in Nepal, there are lots of Tibetan monasteries, or in India. So in that sense, yeah, there aren't. So Tibetan Losar, however, our New Year, is one where I am very intentional and make it a point to observe and celebrate, but also to share on my social media so people can see how, get a taste of our Tibetan culture.
No, that's great. What aspects of Tibetan culture that you feel so mostly connected? Because see, one of the things that I tell myself that, I may live here in the US for the next foreseeable, whatever years, but the initial 20 years of my life, which I spent in Nepal, that's really what, in some sense, that's who I am, right? So from your perspective, what aspects of Tibetan culture do you feel so mostly connected to that you feel is very different, and that's who you are? Like, what would you say?
Yeah. The cultural aspects that I feel most naturally drawn to would have to be our culinary heritage, which is why I pursued the line of business that I did, food, and also our values, our Tibetan Buddhist philosophies. I mentioned just a bit earlier, I'm not particularly religious. I wouldn't necessarily fit in that category. But when it comes to spirituality, there are certain fundamental tenets of Tibetan Buddhism and values that is more of a way of life, our lifestyle, things like karma, believing in karmic effects, and our interdependentness or our interconnectedness. Things like that have really shaped. It's something that I grew up listening to, not just from the Dalai Lama, but how I've seen my parents live or try to be the best version of themselves. Compassion, which, for example, again, like the Dalai Lama, as being the spiritual leader of a community that was displaced, and yet never once since I was a child have I ever heard him use his platform to instigate hate against the community, against the government that has occupied our homeland and done some horrible things, So those are values that I've really, really drawn to. and that has shaped the way I run my business. And then how I am as a small business owner. So it's not just food. Again, it's a purpose. Yeah.
Okay. And what's next for Kiki? And what's next for Himalayan Dumplings? Ideally, where would you like to see your business and yourself in the next, I don't know, like 5 years, let's say?
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of things that I've been working on. I see it like sowing seeds, watering it constantly. And things take time for it to grow into fruition, just like with plants and things like that. So in some ways, I see my approach to my small business. I am sowing the seeds right now on things that you will start to see, things changing, my small business hopefully continuing to grow so I can have a wider reach of audience, and that hopefully I will be on the path to reaching a national audience and be able to achieve my aspiration to be the first woman-owned Tibetan food brand in the country. And not just as a small business, but also have hopefully a national platform where I can use it to leverage it for preserving and strengthening our Tibetan story so it always stays alive, for empowering and possibly perhaps inspiring older women like me who have our reservations and stigmas that we have to fight in restarting everything from scratch, especially when you're a parent and stuff like that. So my aspirations have always been a lot more than just making money and about me. It's a lot bigger than me. And I hope that people will stick around to see what happens in the next few years. There's a lot of things that I'm hoping will bear into fruition that one will get to witness.
Okay. And for the record, I have not stepped into Kiki's restaurant as of yet, which I'm going to do later this week. And I'm going to make all of you jealous because, again, trust me, they look so good. And I'm going to give everyone a feedback. I'll give everyone or probably post a video of how awesome. I can't wait to try it. So remind again, everyone, how can we find you? Instagram, YouTube, websites. How can people reach out to you? How can people find out about you?
Yeah. Well, if you're on social media, like I think most of the world are on, I am on Instagram and Facebook under Himalayan Dumplings. It's just Himalayan Dumplings with the S at the end. If you want to follow along my journey to start something from scratch and be the first person to do so. And who knows, it's an underdog in the fight, I guess, and we'll see how it goes. Yeah. So, or on the website, again, it's just HimalayanDumplings.com.
Okay. Thank you, Kiki. And again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Please take some time to read about Tibet because I think it's important for people to understand where people stand as far as Tibet is concerned. And also just for your knowledge, also, it's nice to know what's out there. And again, if you are in Portland region, please stop by Kiki's restaurant, Himalayan Dumplings. I don't know the address yet, but I'm going to post all the information. So I'll try to make it as easy as possible. And again, Kiki, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And I actually have something for you. I wanted to cook you momo this morning, but it got so busy with kids and everything. But I was
you're gonna be my favorite person, by the way. Now, okay.
Oh, this is a picture, just a picture of my packaging. Where I incorporated like the cultural elements. You see, that's like my dad's handwriting in Tibetan, naming the food. But I got you a book. It's the latest book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it's not just any book. It's the reason why it's so symbolic and important is basically gives a first-person account of Tibet from back then to where it stands now. So it's a personal account of everything that's happened. And the reason why this is important is because the Dalai Lama is now 90. He's going to be turning 90 this July. And it won't be forever that he's around. And it's so hard for me to even say that, but once he's not around, there will be chaos and there will be a lot of propaganda that's already happening in Tibet and around Tibet. So this is one of those things. It'll be a living document, evergreen document that will stay around and that will provide clarity. So I hope you will have an opportunity in future to read that.
I really appreciate it. Kiki, thank you so much. Again, the book's title is it's called The Voice for the Voiceless. And it talks about, is it written by Dalai Lama? It is written by Dalai Lama. Thank you so much. I'm going to read this.
Yes.
And Kiki, again, I really appreciate you being here. And, it takes a lot to speak about these things as well, right? But also the pain that you feel, the pain that your grandparents and your parents suffered, it's quite unimaginable. All of us, we don't want to leave our homeland. There's no way in the world we should be leaving our homelands, but circumstances don't really, favor that all the time, right? But again, I really appreciate that, and what you're doing for the Tibetan community is fabulous. Please, everyone, stop by Beaverton, right? That's where the restaurant is. Portland. And again, don't miss out on the food, but also learn about the Tibetan culture. Right, Kiki, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.